Perhaps I can turn now to Dr. Lee. How do the SDGs and the need to ensure social and economic impact as a university, how has that affected and influenced the decision making, the strategic processes at your university, Ton Duc Chan University in Vietnam?
Hey, thank you very much, Phil. Good morning. It's delighted to join this meeting. Although it's well unfortunate that we couldn't gather in KTS a plan due to COVID-19. But in my opinion, COVID-19 does help us more strongly reconfirm that SDGs plays an even more important role in our university's development than thought. What would happen if we universities only focus on our key role like education, research, and institutional income, rather than paying attention to our society, environment, and community? If so, I believe that we could not make our full responsibility. Not that a university is an educational institution where students study for degrees and where academic research is done. So what is research done for? Basically, doing research is to build our world knowledge and to transfer. At Tôn Đức Thắng University, TDTU, we all understand that research output must be transferred to either education or to our life, to serve the community. So shortly, I do agree that SDG can provide a new measures of innovation. TDTU is a public, autonomous, and young universities in Vietnam, but we are now among leading research universities in the countries and also in the region. 10 years ago, we issued important research regulation in which our research outputs must be transferred to the university's education and to the community. Besides pure publication like ISI Scopus 1, we have patent granted university spin-offs under transferring service centers, and we make close connection to many cities and provinces in the country to serve them. During the process of building, issuing, and renewing our research regulation, we face many difficulties and challenges. We are between our university's leaders and our research staff. And the question lies doing research is to tackle real-world challenges or to continue curiosity-driven purposes and blue sky thinking. To solve this issue, we presented two clear plans to them. The first plan was based on a very good budget, and the second was based on a reasonable budget. And we are from developing countries, so the second plan was considered. And we decided to build our research capacities as long as the university's qualification can be improved and research outputs must be transferred to either education or to our real life. And in the future, when our budgets become much larger, we will place the game of curiosity-driven research. So with our clear targets above, we define our own metric to evaluate our colleagues' research performance. In our opinion, a good research output is not only the one published in a root forum and useful for our educational program, but also be welcomed by the community. It must be able to tackle real-world problems in cities and local areas. This means that its impact on multi-direction targets must be considered. So in short, a good research output must be innovative. And I do not believe that the innovation of research is stifled if we set too many honest outcomes. At Tôn Đức Thắng universities, we always think that without a good directed road, a horse could not run well. And from our practice, we continually find out this is true. Possibly, this may vary from different countries, different institutions, but it's still better if we make a clear targets for all plans. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. Yes, I think there's a really interesting conversation again we should have, and I can see lots of questions are starting to flow in already around the balance between focusing on blue skies research and really honing our research at very clear societal problems that we need to address. And I do think the current pandemic is changing our perceptions around what universities' responsibilities are there. But let's hear from our final panelists before we go to those audience questions. So Jaya, could you give us your take on how you think the SDGs have been framing decision-making in higher education, and also do they provide a really good framework, a basis for actually universities to measure themselves, to set those benchmarks, to set those targets?
Thank you, Phil. Good morning to everyone. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers of this virtual summit, Times Higher Education, for inviting me to be part of this panel discussion. I'm very pleased to be participating in it today. Before going to the subject of innovation and SDGs, I would like to start with some highlighting salient features of the SDGs, which are important when we come to talk about research. Firstly, SDGs and their previous avatar, MDGs, have been unique political achievements in the history of humankind, as for the first time, all countries of the world agreed on a common development path with shared goals and targets. Secondly, the SDGs advocate a multi-dimensional vision of development. The goals cover a wide spectrum of domains ranging from economic, social, political, environmental, cultural, and others. So we are talking of a concept of development that goes beyond GDP growth or economic growth. It is one that promotes enhancement of well-being in all aspects of life. The concept of sustainability itself that underlies these goals is also a multifaceted one, not just environmental, but also economic and social. These are sometimes called the 3 pillars of sustainability. So although people usually tend to think of environmental sustainability when the word sustainability is used, the social and economic dimensions of sustainability are very much part of it and equally important. So let's say we've understood what the concept is and agreed upon what we are aiming for. Now, how do we put this in practice? The first thing is to be able to say where we stand with respect to these goals. That is, we need to be able to evaluate the current state of affairs with respect to all these important aspects enumerated in the SDGs, and then monitor the evolution over time. You can see where I'm coming to. It's absolutely essential to have measures, appropriate measures, indicators of all that should be assessed in these multiple dimensions of well-being or sustainability. Then it's not enough just to identify indicators, but we also need data on all these indicators. So countries should also encourage, and in fact even sponsor, data production. Only with actual measures, we would be able to say how a country is doing in terms of development and sustainable development, and whether it is actually going in the right direction. These set of indicators, and I would like to insist a little bit on this coming from a quantitative background, these set of indicators needs to be very comprehensive so that no major dimension of well-being is neglected and no goal unmeasured. And in this age of high-performing computers and effective big data analytic tools, one has the necessary means to synthesize a large number of indicators in the most appropriate way. So there is absolutely no need to be selective in dimensions or indicators. Size is no longer a technical problem. All these indicators can then be aggregated either into a single index or a smaller number of dimensional aggregates. A dashboard is sometimes called a dashboard, as we will see in the SDG metric that Times Higher Education has developed. But another thing that's very important to understand is that these goals are interdependent and they need to be monitored simultaneously. They cannot be considered as in a silo approach. Otherwise, we may be registering progress on one dimension, but paying a heavy price for it on another dimension. And it's enough to look at economic growth versus inequality, or economic growth versus environmental protection, and so on, to understand the fact that we need to look at it simultaneously. Not only because of that, for another reason too, because these dimensions mutually enhance each other or influence each other. Like better health may lead to better education, and so on. The same is true in case of deprivations too, where people who are in poor health are likely to be less educated. Thus, it's extremely useful to be aware of the strength of such relations for evaluating the multiple effects that a policy can have, even if it explicitly targets only one dimension. And finally, I think one cannot stress enough, and everybody has already said it, all countries are part of this process. All countries need to implement it, as it is the future of the planet which is at stake. And when I say countries, it's not just governments, it's also institutions, and it should be taken that a lot of it must come from a collective responsibility, a feeling of collective responsibility and commitment on the part of all stakeholders, public, private, formal, informal, non-governmental, non-profit, civil society, educational institutions, and especially universities in particular. And above all, I would say every single consumer, because the same changes that we need to make are not marginal. One needs to make structural changes in most cases, like changing lifestyles, as we have done, changing interaction processes or supply chains, but there is no choice. We have that. And now coming to the point on the university, the role of universities. The universities are and should be very much part of this big transformation process. They have par excellence, according to me, the competencies required to go from a theoretical concept or a theoretical framework to its practical application, and also take appropriate action. So we already have almost accomplished the stage concept to practice using, to a large extent, thanks to the SDG framework. We can always revisit and improve it, and I'll come back to it maybe later during the discussion. But I would like to finish with the action part on the part of the universities, as it is directly linked to the SDG metric that's developed by Times Higher Education. In general, I see three types of actions that a university can undertake in promoting the operationalization of the SDGs. They concern the teaching of the SDGs, research on SDGs and their impact on human and nature well-being, and the practice of SDGs. The third point is very important because all institutions need to show by example that they practice what they preach. So in universities, then we come to the question, should all research and innovation be directed towards SDGs? I think I would actually address the issue the other way around. The universities are, as I said, the place of where fundamental research as well as applied research take place. So the state of the art in any field naturally leads to certain fundamental research questions. For example, I'll take a current example, the development of a new vaccine, or learning more about the origin of the universe, or the development of an online platform that enables service providers to reach potential customers. But whatever be the research, it should bear in mind the spirit of the SDGs. This is the kind of structural and philosophical change that I would like to see in the way of doing research, in the sense that the concept of SDGs should pervade the research, and the research should address the question of the social, economic, and environmental consequences of the innovation while designing the solution. The researcher should ensure that the result of the innovation go in the direction of enhancing sustainability objectives, even while answering the primary research question, which need not be specifically related to the SDGs. So I wouldn't go to the extent of saying all research should be directed towards SDGs. Rather, any innovation, whatever be the original question answered by it, should incorporate an examination of how sustainable it is from the social, economic, and environmental points of view. Should follow up with an examination of these sustainability objectives and how far they are reached. So I think I will stop here for the moment and maybe come back to a few more points during the discussion.
Thank you very much. That was, again, a really good provocation. Lots to reflect on there. We have seen across the session, actually, hundreds of people joining us from all over the world. It's really inspiring to see almost 1,000 people are on this session from countries across all the continents. I'm going to start looking at the audience questions now and open to Q&A. But just before we do that, we have a short message from some colleagues in Sydney about how they're using the Sustainable Development Goals and the THE rankings to help with their strategic thinking. So a quick video before we enter the Q&A stage. think we have some sound issues. There's some captions anyway, which is helpful.
You can straight agree with the terrible bushfires that earlier this year, addressing the consequences of it. We made significant contributions over many years in relation to gender equality and social equality, right up to the work we're doing with companies like Microsoft to build future quantum computers. So I would encourage other universities to measure the work that it's doing towards achieving the sustainable development goals, because it has a very hard, real thing that made themselves accomplish. It's something that was a community values, it's something our community values, and I think it's something our students, our staff, and our alumni also.
Well, apologies for the sound issues there. And luckily it was captioned, which is very, very helpful for the University of Sydney, and thanks for your patience. Obviously, when we are moving from real life events to digital events, there's always a few teething troubles. Sorry about the sound, but that's a really powerful message there from our friends and colleagues at the University of Sydney, how the THE impact rankings are starting to provide a set of benchmarks and really an accountability mechanism to help the institution really focus in on its responsibilities to deliver for the Sustainable Development Goals. So we'll now move to some audience questions. We have one from Cesar Vazan from Qatar. How do you perceive the impact of coronavirus on the SDGs? Cesar fears that with all the calls for washing hands, using chemicals, masks, plastics, protective material, etc., will actually harm the work on sustainability and recycling, etc. What do you feel about the way coronavirus will potentially challenge our sustainability, but also perhaps refocus institutions on some core challenges that we can address immediately framed by the SDGs? Who would like to go on? Could I ask perhaps you to take that one first?
Yes, thank you. I think from experience, the COVID-19 crisis also moves into an economic crisis. And we know from experience and also theoretical modeling that economic crises tend, if they are not mitigated, tend to increase inequalities and increase unemployment, etc. And I think we also see that around the world now. But we also know from theory that this is not necessary. It can be mitigated. It can with strong governmental policies, etc. So I think it's very important that countries around the world, when they are now handling this dual crisis with both COVID-19 and the economic crisis, also keep the SDGs in mind. Keep the SDGs in mind to, when they mitigate the crisis, also make sure that they move in the direction of the SDGs as well, and don't forget them at this moment. So, yeah, that's important to keep the SDGs still alive.
I wonder if we should reflect as a panel on the the profound economic fallout of the crisis. Even if we get through this awful pandemic phase, the long-term economic crises will be truly global and obviously affecting universities' finances, affecting governments' ability to fund universities. Do you think, Goran, that perhaps there will need to be a much more clear focus on the types of research universities do? Will universities' freedom to choose their own research fields be perhaps more compromised as we look to use more limited resources to focus on things that society can see has a very clear immediate impact on making things better, you know, whether it be a health issue, for example.
Yeah, I guess that's a clear risk that and challenge that we need to focus on things that can create more immediate value. But I think also this kind of research and innovation work typically also leads to more fundamental research. That we learn things about the fundamental science as well. Yes, there is that risk, but it doesn't have to be all that bad.
Thank you. Jaya, could I ask you to come in on that? And then I see Nozha as well, but Jaya, would you like to comment first?
Yes, I just wanted to come back to the point on the current COVID-19 situation and what it has shown in terms of what the world is capable of, because I think first thing that we know, I mean, we have seen is that the world is capable of acting collectively and responsibly for a worthy cause, the populations and societies, in this case, the protection of human lives. And so we could imagine that the same could be done for other worthy causes too, and worthy causes here are the SDGs, like saving the planet, saving human lives, reducing inequalities, providing universal education, and so on. So provided there's a collective and political will, things can change. And that is the first lesson I learned from the COVID-19. And secondly, that lifestyles can also be changed. I mean, not that they need to be changed dramatically and drastically as we've done at such a great speed, but they can change. And that is something that I think every individual and every society is learning, that there are maybe other ways of living, other lifestyles possible, which may be more favorable to the SDGs and to environmental protection. Another thing that I think we've learned is that cooperation among countries is possible and is essential. Sharing of information, data, sharing of best practices, and mutual help, and everything else. And lastly, I would say also this has given us a warning that we should prepare ourselves for handling pandemic and other emergencies well in advance and not just as they happen. So I think, well, of course, there is intense research going on now, and people are trying to find a cure, a treatment, and a vaccine. But I think these lessons will make us go automatically or naturally into the sustainable development growth paths. That was my takeaway from the COVID situation.
Thank you. And Nozha, did you want to come in on that?
Yeah, sure. In fact, the current crisis raises an important topic, which is not new, but that point out that we need to accelerate it. I mean by that the data sharing and data transparency at the global level, meaning it's in fact an issue of international data governance. It is very important that we address this point and to make it, it's not a new topic, but in real life, it's not that efficient for today. We know that data sharing all over the countries, it helps to make risk mitigation in different areas. It's not only about epidemiology, but also logistics, transportation, and so on and so forth. So we need this data governance around the world through different international entities like OECD or whatever. United Nations also, of course, but all we need to make more clear and more effective this data sharing. We see how important is the data sharing and data transparency about all what is happening in different countries, and really make, in fact, take experience from previous events in different countries all over the world. So data governance is very important.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think Times Higher Education is really trying hard to bring its own data to bear here. In the new impact rankings, we'll hear from Duncan Ross, our Chief Data Officer, from 10:30 today. But we've managed to get really comprehensive data from 859 universities from, I think, 89 countries. So we're trying to build the first ever really truly global data set of institutions' performance across all of the SDGs, and we're really hoping we can create a wonderful resource for sharing. I'll move to the next question, and perhaps Dr. Lee, I could ask you to take this one first. A question from Al Farabi Kazakh National University in Almaty. Jasaya Izavea, sorry if I've got that pronunciation completely wrong, but she asks a very interesting question for this group, I think, especially as we have a mix of academics, university leaders, and industry and former government advisors. Who do you think has the primary responsibility for making sure that higher education institutions actually contribute to the SDGs? Is it a government initiative? Should government lead on this? Should it be a university leadership choice, the rector and the cabinet? Or should it be individual professors and researchers? How do we get this momentum going, and whose responsibility is it? Perhaps we could ask you, Dr. Lee, to reflect on that question first.
Yeah, thank you very much for the interesting question. And you know, in Vietnam, about 10 years ago, a university couldn't decide their leadership. Everything have to depend on the so-called organizing organizing agencies in Vietnam. For example, if a university is under the ministries of education and training, then that ministries will decide who will be directors of our university. But recently, everything has been changed. You know, every university has a university board, and the university board decide who can be director of such universities, and then the central agencies can approve the recommendation from the university council. So whenever a university has such autonomies, it can decide, you know, its strategy, what research topic it can consider, what categories, what strategy it can, follow. And recently in Vietnam, we found that the university have freedom to do, to consider, to invest in what research topic they want to. And for example, I mean, in recent year, we stopped thinking about the so-called blue sky thinking in research. It means that we used to do research for just curiosity. But recently, we focus on improving the education of the universities, and also to serving the real the community. As long as your research have to be welcomed by the community, then we consider you has an impact. Otherwise, we will have to limit our budgets. And I do believe that other institutions in the world should be in the same situation, because I recognize that because of the global economic crisis, the funding or budgets of many universities in the world has been, daily cut. So now they have to be careful in choosing their research strategy. For example, recently we suffered the COVID-19. It seemed to me that we didn't care too much about our environment, about our nature, and now we have to suffer the anger from nature. I mean, COVID-19. So I do believe that our universities or research institutions must be more clever, more practical when choosing the strategy to develop. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to come on to that? There are lots of questions coming through, so I'm happy to move quickly on to others, but does anyone want to add anything to that question? Jaya, would you like to?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to say that I think it is a responsibility of everybody who is cited, that is the government, primarily the government and the university. At the university level, there has to be a strategic decision made that the university research, a lot of it will preferentially go in the direction of the SDGs.
Thank you. There's a very good question here from Richard Follett from Sussex University. At the heart of the UN Vision 2030 is delivering locally based solutions rather than importing often Western-centric or linear models of sustainability. Building global South, oh, it's disappeared from my screen. I think he was going to talk about building Global South-North partnerships, and that's fundamental to delivering on the SDGs. We need to collaborate across the Global North and the Global South. Can I ask the speakers if they think the SDG agenda alters our map of international higher education partnerships? And if so, does COVID-19 accelerate that process? Do we need to rethink the flows of talent and the power relationships and the global dynamics of higher education? Perhaps, Jaya, we could ask you to comment on that first.
Yes, of course. I think the answer is a big yes. Yeah, there needs to be more partnerships and more collaborations between the global, the North and the South. In fact, that's one of the SDGs. Like SDG 17 is the partnership for the goals. And I think that is an I would say that that's one of the SDGs that is an overarching thing for all the other 16 SDGs, in the sense that everything, whether it's for reducing inequalities, or whether it's for decent work, or whether it's for responsible consumption, or whether it's for climate action, I think partnership is necessary, and more than any time partnership with the Global South, definitely, and in terms of higher education. But I would say that in my experience, for example, in the higher education sector, the university sector, the Global South is already playing a good role, because I am a fellow of an association which is called the Human Development and Capability Association, which is very much in the spirit of the SDGs in terms of looking at all different aspects of well-being and development, the multidimensional, promoting a multidimensional vision of development and well-being. And in this association, a majority of participants in the annual conferences and the majority of members of this association are from the South. So there is an enormous partnership between the South and the North in this organization, and in many academic conferences. It needs to be much more in academic conferences too. Yeah.
Thank you. Actually, one of the things when we were compiling and developing the methodology for the impact rankings, the THE impact rankings, was that we wanted to be very, very inclusive. So we decided that we didn't want to reward universities who had the most capacity for data collection and analyses, i.e. the most resources in institutional research. So we allowed institutions to cherry pick the areas they wanted to focus on. But the one area we made compulsory for inclusion in the ranking was that they had to submit to SDG 17. We felt that it's fundamental to delivering the SDGs that actually universities work in real partnerships, not just with each other, but with each other across the traditional socioeconomic divides, and also, of course, with third parties, NGOs, governments, and the private sector. Would anyone else like to come in on that question? Noja, I think you wanted to come in.
Yeah, from industry perspective, in fact, this time, of course, I agree. I fully agree with Jaya in terms of North and South relationship from academia point of view. But what we have learned from this crisis is that it's very important to, in fact, change our perspective from the economic for the economic growth, meaning the importance of industry solutions. So we should also move for decentralized, in fact, model, and each country need its autonomy with regards to local production. It's really very important, and it is valid for each country, North or South. So this is in addition to the previous comment. This crisis, as far as there is confinement, there is no mobility between countries and international contacts and mobility, then each country need to have this also. In fact, it's another dimension, the importance of local solutions for each country, even for, North and South.
Thank you.
Of course, impact on targeted research that should be conducted within also university in different countries.
Absolutely. Dr. Lee, do you want to make any comment there, or shall I move to the next question?
I think next question. Yeah, next question.
Thank you. Well, one of the questions I think is close to Times Higher Education's heart as well, actually. Someone's asking, can we bring awareness of SDGs to students? I think there's evidence that students are becoming more aware. Certainly in terms of activism, we're seeing an increase. but do we have a responsibility as universities to make sure students become leaders here in delivering sustainability? Obviously, the Times Higher Education rankings are, at one level, a strategic leadership tool for universities to set their own agenda, but of course, they're also a student consumer tool. So we are keen that students will use these and ask questions of their universities when they see the results and ask if their universities are participating. But what is the best mechanism for ensuring that students are leading the way in this global challenge?
Can I jump in?
Of course, yes, please.
I think we as universities have a clear responsibility here to provide our students and future leaders or future citizens with the knowledge and the skills to contribute to sustainable development and the SDGs. And we've learned that this is much asked for in industries. We've done interview studies, we have asked our alumni, and we learned that our alumni typically are confronted with sustainability issues in their work a couple of years after their graduation. So it's very important that we give them the knowledge and the skills and integrate sustainability in basically all our educational programs, because it's not just a question for engineers or whatever. It's all future leaders and future citizens needs to have this basic knowledge and skills. So it's important that we integrate it in all our educational programs.
Thank you. I'm just going to, Noja, do you want to come in very briefly? We've got about 5 minutes and I've got one more question, but please do come in.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that it is extremely, sorry, can I go?
Please go, yeah, go ahead, but if we could keep it brief and squeeze one more question in.
I just wanted to add that it is extremely important that universities educate the students and in terms of SDGs. I don't think they should, I mean, they can do it, but with separate programs, because, for example, the University of Geneva has a master's in SDGs, which is focused, which goes around the SDGs, revolves around the SDGs, but also we have integrated a course on sustainable development in all bachelor's curriculum across all faculties, whether it's theology, astronomy, or social sciences. So I think it is extremely important that it's integrated into the curriculum, whether one is a scientist, a businessman, or a social anthropologist, or whatever.
Thank you. Noja, quickly.
Yeah, quickly, what I would like to mention, in fact, it's not that much sustainability, because sustainability, we most of the time think about climate, but I think we need, in terms of university and all stakeholders, focus on human-centric development, long-term human-centric well-being development, rather than short-term economic profit. This is very, very important, I believe, for students and for next generations.
Thank you. I'm going to squeeze in one very quick final question. It's from Hamish McAlpine, who is the head of data and evidence for Research England. He says, speaking as a policymaker and funder, what role should we play in this? Should we direct all our funding to SDGs, or perhaps assess applications for funding with respect to the SDG framework? Do funders do enough at present? It's a huge question right across the world. Should the big research funders be much more focused on impact based around the SDGs when they're making their decisions, or is it important to protect that sort of blue skies, bottom up? It's bottom up versus top down. How much should it be top down? Perhaps if I could ask Goran to respond to this one first.
Yes, thank you. I think obviously there needs to be a balance between blue sky research. There must be room for blue sky research as well. So there needs to be a balance between that and more targeted research. But I think research funders could work much more, active, supporting target-oriented research, focusing on the SDGs. There is room and need for much more in that area. Thanks.
Thank you. And as we reach the final minutes, Jay, would you like to come in?
Yeah, I said there is. Yeah, I totally agree with what just Goran said, that there should be a balance. I think we should leave room for fundamental research or for blue sky research, other type of discoveries, but I think they should be assessed, and that's where I think the THE metric that you're going to launch is going to be very useful, because then the research can be assessed, even if it is some other fundamental research, it can be assessed in terms of its SDG impact. And I think that is a very important step to do, to be integrated into the research programs of universities. And I think
doing towards
take the fact that I have the floor to comment.
Sorry, Jay. I think we have a sound issue coming through. So if we can switch off the production team's mics, that would be great. I think they're just testing a video. Sorry, Jay, to interrupt. Please do finish.
Yeah, I said that I would like to take advantage of the fact that I had the floor to say that the THE metric that you're going to be launching, or we're going to be talking about today, is an important step in that direction in terms of assessing universities, not just in terms of research and publications and how well they are cited and other things, but also in terms of how useful it is for the society. What is the impact on the actual well-being, human, as we said, human and nature well-being on the society. So I think it should go hand in hand. Fundamental research can be there, but it should be kind of integrated into an assessment of in terms of SDGs.
Thank you very much. Well, we are coming to the end of our time, so I think it's just worth me saying that we didn't get to answer all the questions that were posed. It's been wonderful to see so many questions coming through, almost 1,000 people with us on this link. If we use social media, please use THE Global Impact. We can answer more questions on Twitter and on LinkedIn and on Facebook. We will do lots of post-event engagement, so we will continue and strive to answer more of your questions. And of course, the ranking launch itself is coming up in half an hour. So if we can all give a big virtual round of applause to our panelists and thank them very much indeed for their contributions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's very strange not being able to hear the ripple of applause from all across the world.
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. So I'm now going to introduce a brief video from friends of ours across the other side of the world from Sydney, from British Columbia. So I hope the sound will work. Let's have a quick message from Canada.
As president of the University of British Columbia, I am proud that UBC continues to stand out in the Times Higher Education Impact Rankings. The rankings are important to UBC for many reasons. They not only include teaching and research strengths, they go beyond these measures to showcase and to inspire actions that have positive impacts. And they highlight the need for universities to work together for the betterment